I'm August Reed, and I used to think loyalty was the one thing in life I could always lean on, like a solid wall that had never cracked no matter how hard the wind blew. My best friend, Milo Grayson, was supposed to be that wall. We met back in college, two broke kids splitting cheap beer and dreaming big. He was the guy who'd talk me up to girls at parties, the one who'd crash on my couch when his roommate locked him out. When I got engaged to Layla, he was the first person I asked to be my best man. It felt right, you know? Like the universe was nodding in approval. And Layla, she was my everything. The kind of woman who lights up a room just by walking in, with her dark hair spilling over her shoulders and a laugh that made me feel like I'd won something. I loved her so much I'd ignore the little things that gnawed at me, like how she and Milo started getting too close. Way too close. It wasn't anything I could pin down at first, just a feeling in my gut, like when you know a storm's coming but the sky's still clear. There were these looks they'd share, long and quiet, like they were speaking a language I didn't know. Inside jokes would pop up, and I'd be left smiling like an idiot, pretending I got it. Then there was the texting, her phone buzzing late at night, her fingers flying across the screen, and when I'd ask who it was, she'd say, "Oh, just Milo being Milo." I'd nod and let it go because I trusted them. I had to. They were the two people I cared about most in the world. But that trust started to feel heavy, like a coat that didn't fit right anymore. I was drowning in work back then, stuck at this consultancy firm where the hours were brutal and the clients were worse. On top of that, Layla and her mom, Evelyn, were dead set on turning our wedding into some kind of royal spectacle. Evelyn's got money, her husband Thomas too, with his political connections, and they wanted everyone to know it. Me? I just wanted to marry Layla and call it a day, but every time I suggested something simple, they'd look at me like I'd insulted their entire bloodline. "August," Layla would say, "this is our moment." I'd bite my tongue and agree because I loved her, and I figured that's what you do when you love someone. You let them have their way sometimes. My parents, Carmen and Julius, didn't get it. They're retired school teachers, salt-of-the-earth types who raised me in a little house with creaky floors and a fridge that always had leftovers. They'd saved up for years to help with the wedding, but I could tell they felt out of place around Layla's family. "We just want you happy, Augie," my mom would say, patting my hand. My dad would nod, quiet as always, but I knew he worried about me stretching myself too thin. They didn't say much about Milo or Layla, though. They liked them both, Milo especially, since he'd charmed them with his big grin and easy stories. Then there was Sasha, Layla's cousin. She's got this sharp edge to her, like she's always one step ahead of everyone else. She'd watch Milo and Layla with these narrowed eyes, and once, at a barbecue, she asked me straight up, "You ever wonder why they're so buddy-buddy?" I laughed it off, said they'd always been like that. She didn't push, but her look stuck with me. Noah Kim, my coworker, noticed stuff too. He's a quiet guy, good at reading people, and one day over coffee he said, "Milo's around her a lot." "Huh? You cool with that?" I told him it was fine, but his words sat there in my head, piling up with the glances and the texts. I kept pushing it all down, though. Life was too chaotic to stop and think. Between the job and the wedding plans, I was running on empty, coffee in the morning, whiskey at night, just trying to keep my head above water. Layla would come home late sometimes, saying she'd been with her mom or her bridesmaids, and I'd kiss her forehead and say I was glad she was having fun. Milo would text me dumb memes, and I'd laugh, telling myself he was still the same guy who'd had my back all those years. But that gut feeling wouldn't quit. It was like a splinter I couldn't pull out, small but always there, digging deeper the more I ignored it. I didn't know it yet, but that splinter was about to split my whole world open. For now, I just kept moving forward, telling myself loyalty was enough to hold us all together. Man, was I wrong. The rehearsal dinner was at this fancy country club, the kind of place where the napkins probably cost more than my rent. I'm August Reed, and I was standing there in a borrowed suit, feeling like a fish flopping on dry land. Layla looked like a dream, though, gliding around in a dress that hugged her just right, shimmering under the chandeliers. It was almost white, too close to a wedding gown for my liking, but she wore it like she owned the room, charming her dad's rich friends with that smile of hers. I wanted to be proud, you know? My fiancé, the star of the night. But Milo was everywhere, and that's where it started to itch at me. He was laughing with her, his hand brushing her back like it was nothing, and every time I turned around, they were whispering something I couldn't hear. I told myself it was just rehearsal stuff. He was my best man, she was the bride, they had to coordinate. But it didn't feel right. The club was packed with people I barely knew, Thomas Halbert's political buddies, Evelyn's socialite crew, all clinking glasses and talking about stocks or whatever rich folks talk about. My parents were there too, Carmen and Julius, looking like they'd wandered into the wrong movie. My mom kept smoothing her dress, this simple blue thing she'd worn to every nice event since I was a kid, and my dad just sipped his water, staring at the gold-rimmed plates like they might bite him. I felt bad dragging them into this world. They'd never say it, but I could tell they were uncomfortable, out of their depth among the Hal Bridges and their money. Layla's dad, Thomas, was barking orders at the waitstaff, his voice booming over the chatter, while Evelyn flitted around, inspecting everything like she was judging a pageant. It was all too much, and I was stuck in the middle, trying to smile like I belonged. Then Sasha pulled me aside. Layla's cousin has this way of cutting through the noise. She doesn't mess around. We were by the dessert table, and she grabbed my arm, her voice low. Doesn't it bug you? The way they're always whispering. She nodded toward Layla and Milo, who were off by the bar, heads close together, laughing about something. I forced a chuckle, said, Nah, they're just tight. You know how it is. She didn't buy it. Her eyes stayed on me, sharp and steady, like she was waiting for me to admit something. I brushed it off, told her I was fine, but her words stuck like gum on my shoe. I kept watching them after that, noticing how Milo's hand lingered when he passed her a drink, how she'd glance at him like they shared a secret. It was little things, but they piled up fast. Dinner came and went, some fancy steak I barely tasted, and then they both disappeared. 1 minute, Layla was chatting with her mom's friends, and Milo was joking with the groomsmen. The next, they were gone. I checked the patio, the hallway, even the stupid coat room, thinking maybe they were grabbing something. Nothing. My phone was in my hand before I knew it, calling her. Straight to voicemail. Hey, it's me, just checking in, I said, keeping my voice light, like I wasn't starting to sweat. I tried Milo next. His phone was off, straight to that robotic voice telling me to leave a message. My stomach twisted. Where the hell were they? I wandered back to the main room, smiling at guests, nodding like everything was fine, but my mind was racing. Maybe she'd gone to fix her makeup, I told myself. Maybe he'd stepped out for a smoke. He didn't even smoke anymore, but I was grasping at anything. Sasha caught my eye again, raising an eyebrow like she knew something I didn't. I ignored her, grabbed a beer from the bar, and stood there, watching the crowd. My parents were talking to Noah Kim, my coworker, who'd shown up to support me. Noah's a good guy, quiet, but he picks up on stuff. He'd warned me about Milo before, casual-like, and now I wished I'd listened harder. Time dragged on, and they still weren't back. I'm August Reed, and I don't know how to explain the moment your whole world flips upside down, but that's what happened when I saw it. It was after the rehearsal dinner, and I was back at my apartment, alone, still buzzing from the wine and the unease that had been gnawing at me all night. Layla hadn't come home yet. She texted something vague about staying with a friend, and I'd said okay because what else was I supposed to do? Milo hadn't answered my calls either, and I was trying to shake off that sick feeling in my gut. Then my phone pinged. It was an Instagram notification, one of those little alerts that pops up when someone you follow posts a story. It was Layla's account, but it wasn't her usual stuff, no selfies with her bridesmaids or shots of her coffee. It was a video, just a flash, maybe 2 seconds long before it vanished. A hotel hallway. I froze. The carpet was this ugly green pattern with gold swirls. I'd seen it before, at the hotel where Milo had booked rooms for the wedding guests. My heart started pounding, loud and fast, like it was trying to break out of my chest. I grabbed my keys and drove. I didn't even think about it, just got in the car and headed to that hotel, the one Milo had bragged about getting a deal on. I handled the reservations, man, he'd said, tossing me a master key card a few days back. You know, just in case. I laughed then, stuffed it in my wallet without a second thought. Now it was burning a hole in my pocket as I pulled into the parking lot. And there it was, Milo's car, that beat-up red sedan with the dented bumper, parked right out front like he didn't care who saw it. My hands were shaking as I walked inside, the keycard slick with sweat in my grip. The lobby was quiet, just some bored clerk scrolling on his phone, and I took the elevator up, my mind screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had to know. Room 847. That's where the key took me. I don't know why I picked that floor. Maybe it was dumb luck. Maybe it was fate kicking me in the teeth. I stood outside the door, listening, and I heard her. Layla's voice, soft and giggling, muffled through the wood. Then Milo's laugh, low and familiar, the one I'd heard 1,000 times over beers and late-night talks. My stomach dropped. I swiped the keycard, slow and quiet, and pushed the door open just enough to see. They were there, in bed, tangled up in the sheets like it was the most natural thing in the world. She was propped on her elbow, her hair messy, smiling at him. He was saying something, his hand on her arm, and she laughed again, that sound I'd loved so much, now slicing through me like a knife. They didn't even notice me standing there, frozen in the doorway, my breath stuck in my throat. I pulled out my phone. I don't know why, instinct, maybe, or some twisted need to prove it wasn't a nightmare. I hit record, my hands trembling so bad the video was shaky at first. Just a few seconds, that's all I got. Her giggle, his whisper, the way the light caught her face as she leaned closer to him. It was enough. More than enough. The truth was right there, sharp and ugly, staring me in the face. I stopped recording and backed out, silent as I could, pulling the door shut behind me. My legs felt like jelly, but I made it to the elevator, then the parking lot, then my car. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, the video still on my phone, replaying in my head even though the screen was dark. My chest was tight, my eyes burning, but no tears came. Just rage, hot and wild, mixing with this cold, hard thing growing inside me. Resolve, maybe. I wasn't going to let this go quietly. They'd betrayed me, the two people I'd trusted most, and I wasn't going to just slink away and lick my wounds. No, I'd show them what it felt like to have your world shatter. I started the car and drove home, the keycard still in my pocket, the plan already forming in my mind. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They were wrong. I'm August Reed, and I was sitting in this greasy diner at 2 in the morning, the kind of place where the coffee tastes like burnt rubber and the lights flicker just enough to make you twitchy. My laptop was open in front of me, glowing in the dim booth, and that video, the one from room 847, was playing on a loop. Layla's giggle, Milo's whisper, the way the sheets bunched up around them. It was like a punch to the gut every time, but I kept watching, cutting it down, sharpening it up. I wasn't going to let this end with me slinking off into the dark. No way. They'd stand there at the wedding, all dressed up and smug, thinking they'd pulled it off. And I'd be the one to flip the table, right in front of everyone. I sipped the awful coffee, my hands steady now, and worked the footage until it was perfect. Short, clear, undeniable. A little timestamp in the corner for good measure. This was my weapon, and I was going to use it. The diner was mostly empty, just a trucker snoring in the corner and a waitress who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I didn't care. My mind was on the wedding, on that fancy AV system at Wentworth Estate. I'd been there a dozen times with Layla, helping her mom fuss over details, and I'd paid attention to the tech stuff, the big screen, the sound setup, the way it all hooked up. I knew how it worked. I could see it already. Layla walking down the aisle, her white dress trailing behind her. That smile she'd flash at me like everything was perfect. Milo standing with the groomsmen, probably smirking, thinking he'd gotten away with it. And me, up there with the mic, ready to drop the bomb. I saved the edited clip to a USB, labeled it Wedding Surprise, and leaned back, staring at the flickering light above me. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. They'd humiliated me in private. I'd return the favor in public. When I got home, the apartment was quiet, too quiet. Layla had texted earlier, some flimsy excuse about crashing at her friend Jenna's place after the rehearsal dinner. Too much wine, she'd said, with a little winking emoji. I'd replied, glad you're okay, and left it at that. She rolled in around dawn, her hair messy, her makeup smudged, and she smelled like hotel soap, not Jenna's lavender stuff. I was in the kitchen, pouring cereal, acting like nothing was wrong. Rough night? I asked, keeping my voice light. She yawned, nodded, said something about how Jenna's couch was awful. I smiled, kissed her cheek, and said, you should have come home. I missed you. She laughed, said, next time, and shuffled off to shower. I stood there, the cereal going soggy in the bowl, my jaw tight. She had no idea I knew. No idea what was coming. I spent the day pretending. We sat on the couch, her feet in my lap, watching some dumb show she liked. She'd giggle at the screen, nudge me to laugh along, and I'd force it, my mind miles away. Every time her phone buzzed, I'd glance over, wondering if it was him. She'd check it, smile, type something quick, and I'd ask, who's that? Casual, like it didn't matter. Just Sasha, she'd say, or Mom being Mom. I nodded, let it go, but I didn't believe her. Not anymore. The USB was in my pocket, small and heavy, like a loaded gun. I kept touching it, running my thumb over the plastic, reminding myself why I was doing this. It wasn't just anger, it was about taking back what they'd stolen from me. My trust, my peace, my future. They didn't get to walk away clean. Later, I slipped out to the venue. Wentworth Estate was this sprawling mansion, all stone and glass, the kind of place that screamed money. The wedding was tomorrow, and the staff were buzzing around, setting up chairs, stringing lights. I found the AV booth, a little room tucked above the ballroom, and poked my head in. Tony, the tech guy, was there, fiddling with cables. I'd met him before. He was laid back, didn't ask too many questions. "Hey, man," I said, leaning on the doorframe. "Big day tomorrow." He grinned, said, "Yeah, you nervous?" I shrugged, pulled out the USB. "Got a little something for the ceremony. A surprise. Can you load it up for me?" He took it, plugged it into his laptop, and I watched his face as the clip played Layla, Milo, the bed. His eyes widened, but he didn't say anything, just nodded. "When do you want it?" he asked. "I'll give you the signal," I said. "You'll know." He smirked, said, "You're the boss," and handed the USB back. I pocketed it, thanked him, and left, my heart thumping steady now. Everything was set. They'd smile for the camera tomorrow, all right. But I'd be the one calling the shots. I'm August Reed, and the day of the wedding felt like walking into a storm I'd built myself. Wentworth Estate was decked out like something from a fairy tale, flowers everywhere, white chairs lined up perfect, and a string quartet playing soft music that floated over the lawn. I was in my suit, the one my mom had insisted on pressing herself, standing near the entrance, watching guests roll in. My parents showed up early, and I could tell they'd put everything into looking nice. Mom had her hair done at a real salon for once, not just the kitchen sink, and Dad's tie was straight, his shoes polished. "You look so handsome, Augie," Mom said, squeezing my arm, her eyes shiny with pride. Dad just nodded, clapped my shoulder, and said, "Big day." I smiled, told them I was glad they were there, but inside, my stomach was churning. They didn't know what was coming. Nobody did. The place was filling up fast. Thomas Halbridge's political buddies in their stiff suits, Evelyn's friends with their big hats and fake smiles, all chattering like this was the event of the year. Thomas was out front, barking at the staff about the parking, his voice cutting through the music. Evelyn was everywhere, fussing over the seating chart, adjusting the napkins like they were art pieces. I saw Layla's cousin Sasha weaving through the crowd, her eyes sharp as ever, giving me a quick nod like she could sense something was off. Noah Kim was there too, my coworker, looking uncomfortable in a tie but still grinning when he caught my eye. "Ready to tie the knot?" he asked, punching my arm light. I laughed, said something like that, and left it there. He didn't push, but I could feel him watching me after. Layla was off somewhere, probably getting primped with her bridesmaids, and Milo was with the groomsmen, cracking jokes like nothing had happened. I saw him across the lawn, his hair slicked back, that easy grin on his face, and it took everything not to march over and deck him right then. Instead, I slipped away, heading for the AV booth. The ballroom was still quiet, just a few staff setting up the head table, and I climbed the stairs to where Tony was waiting. He was slouched in his chair, scrolling on his phone, but he straightened up when I walked in. "Hey, man," he said, tossing me a lazy salute. "Showtime soon." I nodded, pulled the USB from my pocket, and handed it over. "Just give me the signal," I said, my voice steady. He plugged it in, gave me a look, half curious, half amused, and said, "You're sure about this?" I didn't hesitate. "Dead sure. You'll know when to hit play." He smirked, said, "All right, boss," and leaned back. I left him there, the USB safe in his hands, and headed back down. The air outside was thick with perfume and nerves. Guests were taking their seats, the quartet switching to something slower, more dramatic. My parents found me near the aisle, Mom fussing with my collar like I was a kid again. "It's perfect, Mom," I said, gentle as I could, and she stepped back. Dad just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the crowd like he was trying to figure out what he'd stumbled into. I saw Sasha again, hovering near the bar, her eyes flicking between me and the groomsmen. She didn't say anything this time, but that look, she knew something was brewing. I kept moving, shaking hands, nodding at people, playing the part of the happy groom. My tie felt tight, my palms sweaty, but I didn't let it show. This was the calm before the storm, and I was holding the reins. Layla's mom caught me near the entrance, her face all pinched up like she'd smelled something bad. "August, have you seen Layla? She's taking forever with that hair." I shrugged, said, "She's probably just making sure it's perfect for you," and flashed a smile. Evelyn huffed, muttered something about timing, and stormed off to yell at someone else. I watched her go, then slipped back toward the ballroom, checking my watch. Almost noon. The ceremony was supposed to start any minute, and I could feel the energy shifting, people settling in, the quartet winding down. Milo walked by, clapping my back like we were still buddies. "Ready, man," he said, grinning wide. I looked him dead in the eye, said, "Oh, I'm ready," and watched his smile falter just a second. He laughed it off, moved on, but I knew he felt it. Good. I took my spot near the altar, hands clasped in front of me, the USB's weight gone from my pocket but heavy in my mind. The seats were full now, faces turned my way, waiting for the big moment. My parents were in the front row, Mom clutching a tissue already, Dad sitting stiff like he was at a funeral. Sasha was a few rows back, arms crossed, watching me close. Noah was near the aisle, giving me a thumbs up I didn't return. The clock hit noon, and the music swelled, but Layla didn't appear. Murmurs started rippling through the crowd. Where was the bride? I stood there, calm as I could, feeling the storm building inside me. Tony was up there in the booth, waiting. I'd give the signal soon. They'd all see what I'd seen. The calm was over. Time to let it rip. I'm August Reed, and I was standing there on the balcony above the Wentworth Estate ballroom, looking down at a sea of fancy hats and stiff suits, all those guests waiting for a wedding that wasn't going to happen. The clock had struck noon, and Layla still hadn't walked down the aisle. The string quartet kept playing, looping the same soft tune, but the murmurs were getting louder, people shifting in their seats, craning their necks, wondering where the bride was. I could see my parents in the front row, Mom clutching her tissue tighter, Dad's brow creasing deeper. Sasha was a few rows back, her arms crossed, eyes locked on me like she knew something was about to break. Milo was down there with the groomsmen, fidgeting with his cufflinks, that smug grin still plastered on his face. I gripped the mic in my hand, the cold metal grounding me, and took a breath. This was it. The moment I'd been building towards since that night in room 847. I tapped the mic, and the feedback squealed through the room, cutting off the music. Every head turned my way, 100 pairs of eyes staring up at me from below. "Hey, everyone," I said, my voice steady, louder than I expected. "Thanks for coming out today. I know you're all waiting for a wedding, but, actually, there won't be one." The room went dead quiet, like someone had sucked the air out of it. My mom's hand flew to her mouth, Dad's jaw dropped, and I could see Thomas Halbridge's face turning red from across the ballroom. Evelyn was halfway out of her seat, her mouth opening to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I looked up at the AV booth, caught Tony's eye through the glass, and gave him the nod. "Hit it," I said into the mic, and stepped back as the giant screen behind me flickered to life. The video started, and there they were, Layla and Milo, clear as day, tangled up in that hotel bed. Her giggle echoed through the speakers, his whisper following, the timestamp glowing in the corner. 11:47 p.m., the night of the rehearsal dinner. The room exploded, gasps, screams, a few curses from the back. Phones came out, flashing as people started recording, their faces a mix of shock and glee. Layla's dad went pale, his hands gripping the chair arms like he might snap them. Evelyn let out this shrill shriek, "Turn it off," but nobody moved to stop it. I let it loop once, twice, just long enough for every single person to process what they were seeing, my fiancé and my best man, laughing like they hadn't just stabbed me in the back. Then I waved at Tony, and the screen went black, the silence thicker than before. I stepped back to the mic, my heart pounding but my voice still calm. "So, yeah," I said, "that's why there's no wedding today. I figured you all deserved to know the truth before we got to the I do part." A few people clapped, awkward, scattered, but most just stared, mouths open. My parents looked like they'd been hit by a truck, Mom's tissue shredded in her hands, Dad's eyes wide and wet. Sasha was smirking now, a slow nod my way like she approved. Noah, near the aisle, just shook his head, muttering something I couldn't hear. Milo was frozen with the groomsmen, his face white, his grin gone. I didn't see Layla yet, but I knew she'd show up soon. This wasn't over. The doors at the back slammed open, and there she was, Layla, storming in, her white dress trailing behind her like she'd run straight from the dressing room. Her hair was half up, her makeup perfect, but her eyes were wild. "August, what the hell are you doing?" she shouted, her voice bouncing off the walls. The crowd turned, phones still out, catching every second. I walked down from the balcony, slow and deliberate, meeting her in the middle of the aisle. "I'm calling it off," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't get to play me like that and still get a ring." She stared at me, then up at the blank screen, realization hitting her like a slap. You filmed us?" she stammered, her hands shaking. I nodded. "Yeah, and now everyone knows." Milo stumbled forward then, his tie crooked, babbling like a kid caught stealing. "Augie, man, listen, it's not what it looks like." I cut him off with a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, Milo. You and her, in bed, laughing about it." The guests were whispering now, some leaning in, others pulling back like they didn't want to get splashed by the mess. Layla's mom was crying, loud and dramatic, while Thomas just sat there, stone-faced, like he could will this away. I looked back at Layla, her eyes filling up, and said, "You two thought you'd get away with it. You didn't." Then I turned to the crowd. "Stick around if you want, the bar's open. But I'm done here." I walked out, past the stunned faces, past my parents' worried looks, past Sasha's quiet applause. The air outside hit me hard, cool and clean, and I kept going, my shoes crunching on the gravel. I'd shown them the truth, public, raw, and real. They could deal with the fallout. I was done carrying their lies. I'm August Reed, and I was back in the Wentworth Estate ballroom, the air still thick with shock after the video dropped. I just walked off the balcony, leaving the mic behind, and the crowd was buzzing like a kicked beehive, whispers, gasps, a few nervous laughs cutting through the silence. My parents were still in their seats, Mom's hands over her face, Dad staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Sasha was smirking, her arms crossed, and Noah was shaking his head, caught between disbelief and respect. I'd made it halfway down the aisle when Layla burst in, her white dress swirling around her like some furious angel, screaming my name. "August, what the hell is this?" she yelled, her voice sharp enough to slice through the chatter. I stopped, turned, and faced her, feeling every eye in the room on us. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the private betrayal going public, right here, right now. She stormed up to me, her face red, tears already streaking her makeup. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the wedding," she shouted, like that was the biggest problem we had. I laughed, loud and harsh, and it echoed off the high ceilings. "There's no wedding, Layla," I said, stepping closer so she couldn't miss a word. "Not after what you did." Her eyes darted to the blank screen, then back to me, and I saw it click. The video, the hotel, Milo. She opened her mouth, but before she could get a word out, Milo stumbled in behind her, his suit wrinkled, his face pale as milk. "Augie, man, let me explain," he started, his hands up like he could wave this away. I didn't let him finish. I walked right up, pulled my arm back, and slapped him across the face, hard. The crack rang out, loud and clear, and the whole room went still, like time itself stopped breathing. Milo staggered back, his hand flying to his cheek, a red mark blooming where I'd hit him. Layla screamed, "You're hurting him," and dropped to her knees beside him, her dress pooling around her like spilled milk. She grabbed his arm, sobbing, her hair falling in her face. I looked down at them, this pathetic little scene, and laughed again, bitter as hell. "Funny," I said, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. "I said the same thing to myself last night. You're hurting him, August. Guess what? I don't care anymore." Milo just sat there, cradling his face, muttering something I didn't bother to hear. Layla's cries got louder, but they didn't touch me, not like they used to. I was done feeling sorry for her. I turned to the crowd, all those wide-eyed guests still clutching their phones, recording every second. "Thanks for coming out," I said, raising my voice so it carried. "Sorry there won't be vows today, but at least you got some honesty. Enjoy the open bar. Thomas and Evelyn paid good money for it." A few people chuckled, nervous and low, but most just stared, too stunned to move. My parents were on their feet now, Mom reaching for me, but I shook my head, gave her a small smile to say I was okay. Sasha clapped, slow, deliberate, like she was cheering me on. Noah nodded, his arms crossed, and I could tell he got it, even if he didn't know what to say. Thomas Halbridge was still in his chair, his face like stone, while Evelyn was wailing into a napkin, her friends fussing around her like she was the victim here. Layla scrambled up, grabbing my arm, her nails digging in. "August, please, we can fix this," she begged, her voice breaking. I pulled away, gentle but firm, and looked her in the eye. "There's nothing to fix," I said. "You broke it. You and him." She flinched, tears spilling faster, but I didn't soften. Milo was on his feet now, rubbing his jaw, looking at me like a kick dog. "You didn't have to do this, man," he said, quiet, almost whining. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the cologne he'd probably put on for her, and said, "Yeah, I did. You don't get to screw me over and walk away smiling." He looked away, and that was it. I was done with him too. I walked past them, heading for the doors, the crowd parting like I was contagious. My shoes clicked on the marble floor, steady and loud, and I didn't look back. Outside, the air hit me cold and sharp, cutting through the sweat on my neck. I could hear the chaos spilling out behind me, Evelyn's sobs, Thomas barking at someone, Layla's voice calling my name one last time. I kept going, past the fancy cars, past the valets who didn't know where to look. The slap still stung my hand, a good kind of ache, and I flexed my fingers, letting it sink in. I'd hit him, and it felt right, like I'd taken something back. They could cry and yell all they wanted. The truth was out, loud and messy, and I wasn't the one who'd have to clean it up. I was free of their lies, and that was worth every gasp in that room. I'm August Reed, and that night after the wedding I was back in my apartment, the quiet hitting me harder than I expected. The place felt empty, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something that wasn't coming. Layla's stuff was everywhere, her shoes by the door, her candles on the coffee table, that fancy throw blanket her mom gave us draped over the couch. It all looked wrong now, like leftovers from a life I didn't live anymore. I stood there, hands in my pockets, staring at it all, and decided I wasn't keeping any of it. Not a single piece. They betrayed me, and I wasn't going to sleep surrounded by their ghosts. So I started packing, slow at first, then faster, like I was racing something I couldn't see. I grabbed a roll of packing tape and some boxes I'd kept from moving in, the kind with faded store logos on the sides. Her shoes went in first, those overpriced heels she'd strut around in, clicking on the hardwood like she owned the world. I tossed them in, one pair after another, not caring if they scuffed. Then the candles, stupid things I'd pretended to like because she'd light them and say it made the place cozy. They smelled like lavender and lies now, and I threw them in hard enough to hear the glass crack. The blanket came next, folded neat and shoved into a corner. Every box got a label, big, sharp letters and black marker, Layla's crap. I didn't care if it was petty. It felt good, like I was peeling her out of my life one piece at a time. The kitchen was worse. Her mugs were in the cabinet, the ones with cheesy sayings like bride-to-be and love wins. I snorted, grabbed them, and wrapped them in old newspaper, stacking them in another box. There were pictures too, framed ones from her mom, Evelyn, all glossy and staged, sitting on the counter like trophies. Us at the beach, her laughing, me grinning like an idiot who didn't know what was coming. I took them down, pulled the photos out, and ripped them in half, slow, deliberate, the sound loud in the quiet. The frames went in the box, the torn pieces in the trash. I didn't want her face looking at me anymore. It took hours. My hands were sore, my back aching, but I kept going. Her clothes were the last big thing, dresses and sweaters stuffed in the closet, smelling like her perfume. I yanked them off the hangers, balled them up, and crammed them into the final box. There was this red dress, the one she'd worn to some party Milo threw back in college, and I stopped for a second, holding it. I remembered her spinning in it, laughing, him watching her like she was the only one in the room. My chest tightened, and I threw it in harder than the rest, slamming the lid shut. That was it. Every trace of her, boxed up and ready to go. I rented a U-Haul the next hour. A beat-up white van that smelled like cigarettes and bad decisions. Loading it was quick. I hauled the boxes out, stacked them tight, and locked the back. The drive to the Howbridge estate was long, the city lights blurring past, my hands tied on the wheel. Their place was this huge house on a hill, all pillars and perfect grass, the kind of spot that screamed money. I pulled up to the front, killed the engine, and started unloading. One by one, I carried those boxes to their doorstep, stacking them neat and tall. Layla's crap, right there for the world to see. The night was cool, quiet except for the crickets, and I worked fast, my breath puffing out in little clouds. When the last box was down, I stepped back, wiped my hands on my jeans, and rang the bell once, sharp and loud. I didn't wait. I was back in the van, pulling away, when the porch light flicked on. I didn't look to see who it was. Layla, Thomas, Evelyn, some maid they'd hired. Didn't matter. Let them deal with it. Let her see how fast I could undo everything she'd left behind. The road stretched out dark ahead of me, and I cranked the radio, some old rock song filling the cab. My apartment would be empty when I got back. No candles, no mugs, no red dress haunting the closet. It'd be mine again, just mine, and that felt like a win. I wasn't erasing her for them. I was doing it for me. She could go back to her old room, her fancy life, her lies. I was done carrying her weight. The U-Haul rattled as I drove, the boxes long gone, and I let myself breathe deep for the first time in days. The slap I'd given Milo still echoed in my hand. The video still burned in my mind. But this was something else. Packing up the past was my way of closing the door, locking it tight, and tossing the key. They'd hurt me, sure, but I wasn't their punching bag anymore. I was free of her stuff, her smell, her shadow. The Hal Bridges could figure out what to do with those boxes. Me? I was heading home to a clean slate, and I wasn't looking back. Not tonight. Not ever. I'm August Reed, and the morning after I dumped Layla's stuff at her parents' place, I was in my apartment, sipping coffee from a plain mug, none of her cheesy ones left to mock me. The place was bare now, just my couch, my TV, my books, and it felt good, like I'd scrubbed her out of the walls. I was halfway through my second cup when the knocking started, soft at first, then loud, insistent, like someone was trying to break the door down. I set the mug on the counter, my gut telling me who it was before I even opened it. Sure enough, there they were, Layla, Thomas, and Evelyn Halbridge, standing on my doorstep like a firing squad. Layla's eyes were red, her hair messy, and her parents looked ready to start a war. I leaned on the frame, crossed my arms, and waited. This was going to be ugly, and I was ready for it. Thomas stepped forward first, his face all hard lines and fury, like he was still some big-shot politician barking orders. "We want compensation," he said, his voice booming like it did at the rehearsal dinner. 15,000 to start, for the wedding, the embarrassment, the mess you made. I laughed, couldn't help it, a sharp bark that made his eyes narrow. Evelyn jumped in, waving a stack of receipts in my face, her voice shrill. "You destroyed our family's reputation, August. Do you know what this has cost us? The catering, the venue, the flowers, gone. And now everyone's talking, spreading that. That filth you showed." She was shaking, her perfectly manicured nails trembling, and I just stood there, letting her rant. Layla hung back, tears streaming down her face, looking small for once, not the shining bride she'd been yesterday. I let them go on for a minute, Thomas puffing up, Evelyn flapping those papers like they were a weapon. Then I held up a hand. "You done?" I said, calm as I could. They stopped, staring at me like I'd lost my mind. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me, and looked Thomas dead in the eye. "You want money? For what? The wedding your daughter ruined? The reputation she trashed when she climbed into bed with my best friend?" His mouth tightened, but he didn't answer. I turned to Evelyn. "And you, those receipts? That's on you. I didn't ask for a circus. I wanted something simple, but you and Layla had to make it a show. Well, you got one, just not the one you planned." Layla finally spoke, her voice soft, breaking. "August, it was a mistake. Just one stupid night. I didn't mean to hurt you." She reached for my arm, but I pulled back, shaking my head. "A mistake," I said louder now. "You were laughing, Layla. In that bed, with him, like it was a joke. I've got it in high definition. Don't tell me it didn't mean anything." She flinched, wrapping her arms around herself, and started sobbing harder. Evelyn snapped. "How dare you speak to her like that?" But I cut her off. "How dare she do it to me? How dare Milo? You don't get to play victim here." Thomas squared his shoulders, like he was about to charge. "We'll sue you," he said, low and mean. "Defamation, emotional distress, whatever it takes. That video's illegal, and you'll pay for it." I smirked, couldn't help it, and leaned in close. "Go ahead," I said. "Sue me. But you know how many phones were out yesterday? How many people recorded it? That video's everywhere by now. Your daughter's little romp isn't my secret to keep. You take me to court, and your reputations will be Exhibit A. Good luck spinning that." His face went slack, just for a second, and I knew I'd hit him where it hurt. Evelyn gasped, clutching her receipts tighter, but she didn't have a comeback. They weren't used to losing, and I wasn't backing down. Layla tried again, stepping between her parents, her voice pleading. "Please, August, I'm sorry. I love you, I still do. Can't we just talk?" I looked at her, really looked, and saw the girl I'd loved once. Beautiful, broken, begging. But all I could hear was her giggle from that video. All I could see was Milo's hand on her arm. "There's no forgiveness for this," I said, quiet but firm. "Not when I've got it burned into my brain. You don't get to say sorry and make it go away." She crumpled, sinking onto the porch steps, her sobs loud and messy. Thomas put a hand on her shoulder, glaring at me like I was the monster here, and Evelyn hissed, "You'll regret this." I shrugged, opened my door, and stepped back inside. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not the one who has to live with what you did. Take your threats and go." I shut the door, locked it, and stood there, listening as Thomas muttered something angry, as Evelyn tried to hush Layla's crying. Their footsteps faded, the car engine roared, and they were gone. I went back to my coffee, cold now, and sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where her stuff used to be. They wanted money, apologies, a rewind button. They weren't getting it. I'd paid enough, in trust, in love, in sleepless nights. This was their mess now, and I was done footing the bill. Let them sue. Let them cry. I was free, and that was worth more than 15 grand any day. I'm August Reed, and a couple weeks after the wedding mess, I was starting over in a new place. A cheap little apartment across town, smaller than the last one but mine, all mine. The walls were plain, the floors creaked, and the windows let in just enough light to keep it from feeling like a cave. I'd cut my hair short, buzzed at myself in the bathroom with a pair of clippers I bought on sale, and it felt good, like shedding an old skin. I'd picked up a new desk, too, a simple wood thing from a secondhand shop, and set it up by the window with my laptop and a mug of black coffee. No more fancy stuff, no more traces of Layla or Milo or the life I'd thought I'd have. It was just me now, and I was okay with that, better than okay, even. I was free. Word got around fast after that day at Wentworth Estate. Milo lost his job, some marketing gig he'd bragged about for years. Turns out his boss didn't like the optics of a guy caught on video cheating with his best friend's fiancée. I heard it through Noah, who'd texted me a quick, "You hear about Milo?" with a laughing emoji. I didn't ask for details, just said, "Good," and left it there. The video leaked too, not my doing, but all those phones recording in the ballroom meant it was only a matter of time. It popped up online, spread like wildfire, and suddenly Layla and Milo were the talk of every gossip chain from here to the Halbridges' fancy neighborhood. Thomas and Evelyn tried spinning it. Some press release about family privacy and misunderstandings, but nobody bought it. The timestamp on that footage was too clear, the giggles too real. They were stuck with the truth, and I didn't feel a lick of guilt about it. People reached out after, some I expected, some I didn't. Old college buddies sent messages, half judging, half cheering, like, "Man, that was brutal," or "You're a legend, Reed." I didn't reply much, just a thanks here and there. My parents were different. They called a lot, worried sick about the money they'd sunk into the wedding, the savings they'd scraped together. Mom's voice was shaky when she said, "We just wanted you happy, Augie," and I could hear her fighting tears. Dad was quieter, but one night he got on the phone and said, "We can earn money again." Your peace? That's priceless. That stuck with me. They came by the new place once, brought a pot of Mom's chili, and sat on my ratty couch, looking proud in their own way. I hugged them tight before they left, told them I was fine. And I was. Sasha surprised me too. I ran into her at a cafe downtown, just grabbing a coffee to go, and she was there, leaning on the counter with that sharp grin of hers. Well, she said, eyeing me up. "The man who burned it all down." I laughed, shrugged, and said, "Had to." She nodded, sipping her latte, and then got serious for a second. "You did what most wouldn't have the guts to, August. Respect." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded back, and she gave me a little salute before walking off. It felt good, hearing that from her, someone who'd seen it all unfold and didn't sugarcoat a thing. I kept a copy of the video, downloaded it to a hard drive I tucked in a drawer. Not to watch. I was done reliving that night, but just in case. Thomas had threatened legal action, and if they came at me, I'd have proof of why I did what I did. But I didn't need to see it anymore. The sound of Layla's laugh, Milo's whisper, they'd haunted me long enough. I'd played it over and over in those first few days, letting the anger fuel me, but now it was just noise I didn't want. I was moving on, step by step, and that meant letting go of the replay button. The new place started feeling like home. I'd wake up early, make coffee, sit at that desk, and work, freelance gigs mostly, stuff I could handle without the grind of the consultancy firm. The quiet was nice, no buzzing phones or late-night excuses to dodge. I'd walk to the corner store sometimes, pick up a sandwich, chat with the guy behind the counter about nothing important. Life was simpler, smaller, but it fit me better than the chaos I'd left behind. I'd think about them sometimes, Layla, Milo, the Hal Bridges, but it wasn't sharp anymore, just a dull ache that faded a little more each day. One night, sitting on my couch with a beer, I looked around and realized I didn't miss it, the big plans, the fancy wedding, the life I'd thought I'd wanted. I'd lost a lot, sure, but I'd gained something too, myself. No more pretending, no more carrying their lies. I was August Reed, just a guy with a clean slate and no guilt, and that was enough. The hard drive stayed in the drawer, the past stayed packed away, and I kept moving forward. Free, finally, and it felt damn good.